Welcome to this edition of Valor Media. This is episode number 58 for March 15th, 2021, and I'm your host, Mark Appenzeller. Today I want to share something with you that I have to admit I was not originally planning on talking about. About a week and a half ago, I was kicking ideas around for a topic for this particular installment, and I had something that I thought would be worth sharing. I was kind of developing some ideas for it, and then there was a life event that occurred that kind of grabbed my attention. And over a period of several days, I realized that I was really giving a lot of deep thought to something that I felt would be a much better subject for what we're talking about today. So what I want to share with you is much more of a personal recollection than what I was originally intending. And I'll preface everything by saying that this episode is definitely not scripted. It's really just me sharing from my heart. But I hope it'll be relevant for you. I believe it will. Over the last several days, I've been thinking a lot about something that we all know about, something that we talk about. But one of those things that unfortunately we've kind of just reverted to making a cliche. It's one of those things that we've kind of trivialized. And although we kind of understand the definition, we kind of have a cursory grasp of what it's all about, there's such a deeper meaning that so many times gets left by the wayside. That's what I wanted to revisit in today's episode. And I just want to leave it with you as something that will hopefully challenge you to maybe look a little bit deeper and understand what it means in your life and in your context. What had happened over the period of the last week or so was the death of an old family friend. Literally somebody I've known my entire life. It was a lady who all my life was the next-door neighbor of my parents. Her and her husband, who preceded her in death about 30 years ago, and their daughter, who was one of my great childhood pals and who is now married and has kids of her own. But they were our next-door neighbors all my life. This lady was one of my mom's dearest friends, and it was really an impact to me when I heard of her passing. Their daughter asked me if I would play guitar at her mom's funeral, and I was deeply honored to do that. But as I was in that environment and just remembering growing up around this family, I really found myself focusing on the fact that, to me, in so many ways, they were the epitome of what I think of when I hear the word neighbor. Now, the word neighbor, like so many other things in the 21st century, has unfortunately, in many settings, lost all of its meaning. I think so many times we trivialize it and we relegate it to a descriptor of somebody who just has a close physical proximity to us. We talk about our next-door neighbor, our neighbor across the street, the neighbor upstairs. But a lot of times, it's in a negative context. Maybe if you live in an apartment, the neighbor upstairs is the one that plays metal music at 2 a.m. at full volume and doesn't care if you pound on the floor. Maybe your neighbor is the person who has the dog that barks 24 hours a day. It's not always a good connotation. And I think that's a shame, because when I think of this lady and her family, these wonderful people that I grew up living next to, I saw embodied in them what I really think being a neighbor is all about. And being a neighbor isn't something that you just casually do, and it's not a badge that you get to put on just because you live next door to someone. Being a neighbor, I think, is really about intentionality. That's what I've been thinking about so much over the course of this last week, and that's what I wanted to share with you today. It's not a profound message. It's nothing earth-shattering, and yet maybe it should be. I feel that today, especially with so many problems and stresses and tensions, now maybe more than ever, people need to really embrace that whole idea of what it means to be a neighbor. I know with this family, they were such wonderful people and they were so giving. And one of the things that always impressed me with them was that they were such diligent people who seemed committed to hard work. They had a massive garden in their backyard. Now, my family, we definitely were not gardeners. We had a tiny scrubby patch in the corner of the backyard where we grew some spring onions. But our neighbors had this incredible vegetable garden, and they weren't playing. It was a massive collection of wonderful growing things. They grew everything under the sun, corn and squash and okra and tomatoes and a lot of different things. And this lady was really skilled at canning, so they always had this incredible stockpile of food they had grown themselves. And because of that, they were always giving food away. But it wasn't just food. They were always quick to help, always quick to offer something, always quick to be there if something was needed. That to me is really the definition of being a neighbor, and they exemplified that to the highest possible degree. Now, my wife and I, in so many ways, are equally blessed in the development that we live in. We have several amazing neighbors around us. Now, I don't know where you live. We've had listeners from all over the world. If you're in a warm climate where it never snows, this probably won't resonate with you. But I live in Western Maryland, and we get deep snows here. And you really find out who your true neighbors are when it snows. Because snow brings everybody out. And we get snows sometimes that are more than a foot. And it's not always just snow. Sometimes there's ice mixed in. And cleaning your car, cleaning your driveway, cleaning your front walk isn't a quick, easy thing. It takes a lot of exertion. It can be very strenuous. And on my street, you see all the neighbors coming out helping each other. Now, some people have snow blowers. Other people are just in really good physical shape and are a monster with a shovel. But everybody comes together and helps everybody else out. And it's an amazing thing to see. Because shoveling can be miserable, especially if you're shoveling while it's still snowing and it's 15 degrees. But what's incredible is you see people really giving of themselves, really sacrificially giving. And it's not an issue of, well, I'll shovel your driveway if you come over next time and shovel mine. We've seen situations where somebody will come and shovel and you never even know who did it. They're not doing it to be seen. They're not doing it to get something in return. And to me, that's such a powerful concept and something that I think is really lost today. I feel really bad for younger people today, and I don't just mean little kids. I mean, even a lot of people in their 20s or 30s, they may very well have grown up in a world where that idea of being a neighbor was never really demonstrated. And I think it's become a lost art. There's an episode of the old Andy Griffith Show where Floyd the barber and Mr. Foley, who runs the grocery store, kind of become embroiled in this opening up of an old grievance between the two of them that's supposed to have happened 19 years previously. Allegedly, back in the day, Mr. Foley was getting a haircut from Floyd the barber. They had a misunderstanding, and Floyd supposedly hit him. And it had kind of been buried for many years, but in this episode, it kind of all gets stirred back up to the surface again. Each is blaming the other for starting the altercation. And finally, at the end of the episode, Andy steps in, and he reminds them that over the years, they've not only been friends, but they've been neighbors. And that line always made a huge impact on me, because it's amazing to hear in that context that he's putting the word neighbor above the word friend. Now, particularly in this world drenched with social media and the whole idea of friending someone, we really get wrapped up in the idea that being a friend is somehow that ultimate expression of interacting with someone who isn't a blood relative. But I'm kind of leaning toward the idea that a neighbor is even above being a friend. Because like I said, being a neighbor isn't about doing something because you have a close emotional relationship with someone. It's not about doing something because you're positive you'll get something in return because that person loves you. You can be a good neighbor to somebody that you're not even friends with. Now, my wife and I are very fortunate to have friendly neighbors who are good friends and good neighbors, but that doesn't always happen. And I think it's a really important concept that we need to revisit in 2021. I think there's something about embracing being a neighbor that has a spiritual aspect to it. In Luke chapter 10, Jesus talked about this. He relayed one of the most famous passages of Scripture, the parable of the Good Samaritan. And everybody's heard that story so many times. It's been preached about, taught about. There are many different interpretations and many different takes. There's a lot of good truth there. But to me, the most fascinating concept is that the whole story was born out of the fact that a teacher of the law asked Jesus, "What do I have to do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus said, "Well, what's it say in the law?" And the man replied, "Well, we're supposed to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, all of our soul, all of our strength, and all of our mind, and love our neighbor as ourself." And so Jesus told this story about the Good Samaritan, not just to say you should be nice to people, but to really pose that question, who in the story was the neighbor? Now, the man who was walking down the road from Jerusalem to Jericho and who was attacked by thieves, beaten, stripped, and left for dead, he needed someone to come alongside of him. Now, he was passed on that road by a priest and a Levite who both culturally would have been the guys to come alongside of him. It wouldn't have been that much of a stretch for either one of them to have said, "You know what, I'm going to help you." But neither one of them did. The Samaritan, the one guy in the equation who culturally would not have hung out with this injured man, went out of his comfort zone, and maybe even went out of his safety zone to help him. He wasn't expecting anything in return. And he didn't take a casual approach either. He was really intentional about helping. He didn't just say, "Well, I hope you feel better." He took the man, he bound up his wounds, he put oil and wine on them, he put the man on his own donkey, he took him to an innkeeper, he paid the innkeeper, and he said, "If there's any additional expense incurred before I get back, I'll pay it." He wanted to make absolutely sure that the injured man was completely taken care of. It gets back to what I said earlier about that sacrificial giving. And the interesting thing is, at the end of relating that parable, Jesus asked the teacher of the law, "So who in that story was the neighbor?" Interesting that that was the takeaway. He wasn't just saying, do nice things for people. He was talking about this idea of being a neighbor. And that's why I think it really is a spiritual dynamic. It's something so much deeper than what we usually think of. Fred Rogers, with his Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, certainly touched a lot on that deeper concept. And I think he gave a lot of people a glimpse at what it really means to embrace being a neighbor. But I think in this current day and age, we need to hear that again. We need to see that again. We need to recognize that the concept of being a neighbor was huge to Jesus. We need to be neighbors, and sometimes we need neighbors. And maybe that's where you find yourself today. Maybe you're in a circumstance where you feel like you don't have a true neighbor. You might feel like you have to figure out everything by yourself and go it completely alone, and that can be debilitating and overwhelming. If that's where you find yourself today, please reach out to us at Valor Ministries. You can contact us at info@thevalorcenter.org, and someone from the Valor Ministries team will get back in touch with you. We ultimately want to point you to Jesus Christ, but we also want to find ways that we can come alongside of you. We want to be an encouragement to you. We want to connect you with some of the different ways that we really can help you to find that abundant life Jesus came to give us. We have life development classes, which you can even attend remotely via Zoom, that cover a wide variety of topics from relationship boundaries to parenting to money management. We have a personal development coaching program where someone can look at your own individual life circumstances and help you start to find strategies to really live victoriously. That's what we're all about at Valor. Our executive director, Lori Riston, recently published a book, You Were Made to Thrive, 7 Strategies to Move You from Crisis to Thriving. You can find Lori's book on Amazon.com or on www.valorxl.com/products. And we really want the Valor Media podcast to be a blessing to you. So if there are topics you would specifically like to hear us discuss, please share them with us at media@thevalorcenter.org. I encourage you to come back here each week. Please subscribe to or follow this podcast. Also, check us out on Facebook at Valor Ministries and Valor XL, and on our websites www.thevalorcenter.org and www.valorxl.com. If this podcast is a blessing to you, would you consider financially supporting us so that as we continue to move through 2021, we can branch out, do new things, bring new content to you on a weekly basis? If so, you can make your tax-deductible donations securely online by going to www.thevalorcenter.org/donate, or you can send a check or money order to Valor Ministries, 324 East Antietam Street, Suite 104, Hagerstown, Maryland, 21740. I'd really like to thank you for joining me today. I want to invite you to come back next week when I'll have a special guest. We'll be doing a slightly different format. I think it'll really be a blessing to you. Until then, please try to find ways you can be a neighbor to someone who needs one. If you need a neighbor, if you need someone to come alongside of you, please reach out to us. And above all else, don't ever forget, you were made to thrive.